I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end. And comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story travels. The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I heard the words that would change everything. I was standing near the ornate flower arrangements I had personally selected and paid for, watching my daughter Sarah in her wedding dress, the one I had worked double shifts to afford. The reception hall buzzed with laughter and celebration, the scent of white roses and baby's breath filling the air. I had chosen those flowers because they reminded me of the tiny bouquet Sarah had picked for me when she was 5. Her chubby fingers wrapped around dandelions from our small apartment's fire escape. The silk of her dress caught the light from the crystal chandeliers I had specifically requested, even though they added an extra $1,000 to the venue cost. I remember standing in the bridal shop 6 months earlier, watching Sarah twirl in front of the mirror, her face radiant with joy. The dress was everything she had dreamed of, layers of ivory tulle, delicate beading that caught the light like stars, a cathedral train that flowed behind her like water. It's perfect, Mom, she had breathed, her eyes shining. This is the one. I had looked at the price tag and felt my stomach drop. $4,000. More than I made in 2 months of cleaning houses. But I had smiled and nodded, already calculating how many extra shifts I would need to work, how many meals I could skip, how I could make this dream come true for her. But now, as I stood there in my navy dress, the nicest one I owned, purchased on sale 3 months ago, I heard my daughter's voice cutting through the ambient chatter. She was talking to her new sister-in-law, gesturing dismissively in my direction with the same hand that wore the pearl bracelet I had given her for her 16th birthday, the one I had saved for months to buy. Oh, her. She's just the maid who paid for everything. The words hit me like cold water. I felt my chest tighten, not with anger, but with a profound sadness that seemed to hollow out my bones. I set the champagne glass down carefully on the nearest table, my fingers lingering on the crystal stem. Even that detail, the expensive glassware, was something I had insisted on. Working extra cleaning jobs to afford the upgrade because Sarah had mentioned how elegant crystal would look in the photographs. The laughter around that comment echoed in my ears as I walked slowly toward the restroom, my heels clicking against the marble floor I had specifically chosen because it reminded me of elegance Sarah deserved. Each step felt heavy, weighted with the realization that all my sacrifices had been reduced to a dismissive joke. In the mirror, I saw a woman of 52, her brown hair, carefully styled that morning at a salon I couldn't really afford. Her makeup applied with the same precision she used to clean wealthy people's homes. But behind my eyes, I saw something cracking. I touched the small gold cross at my throat, the only piece of jewelry my mother had given me before I left home. My fingers traced its familiar edges as I tried to steady my breathing. The bathroom was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of the string quartet I had hired, playing the classical pieces Sarah had insisted upon. Mozart, she had said, because it sounded sophisticated. I didn't know Mozart from any other composer, but I had hired the best musicians I could afford because it mattered to her. The face staring back at me in the mirror told a story I had never allowed myself to fully acknowledge. These weren't the hands of someone who had simply paid for everything. These were the hands of a woman who had built a life from nothing, who had turned teenage disgrace into quiet dignity, who had raised a daughter alone against impossible odds. The small scar on my left hand from when I had cut myself washing dishes at the diner, the calluses from years of scrubbing floors, the wedding ring I had never worn, because there had never been a wedding, never been a partner to share the burden. I was 17 when I first felt this kind of abandonment. The memory rushed back with startling clarity, standing in my childhood bedroom, my father's voice booming from downstairs, my mother's sobs mixing with his anger. I was 3 months pregnant, my uniform skirt already tied around my waist, and I knew my life was about to change forever. I remember the smell of that room, my mother's lavender perfume mixed with the scent of fresh laundry she had been folding when I told her the news. The afternoon light was streaming through the lace curtains she had sewn herself, casting delicate shadows across the hardwood floor my father had refinished the summer before. Everything about that house spoke of careful attention, of love expressed through small acts of service, the same kind of love I had spent my entire adult life giving to Sarah. My mother had been ironing my father's shirts when I found the courage to tell her. She had set the iron down carefully, her face going pale, and then she had sat on the edge of my bed and held my hands while I cried. "What are we going to do?" she had whispered, and I knew she meant what were we going to do about my father, about the church, about the neighbors who would whisper and point. "Get out," my father had said later that evening, his face red with shame and disappointment. "You've brought disgrace to this family." But it was the look in his eyes that haunted me still, not hatred, but a deep, wounded disappointment that seemed to age him before my eyes. He had been a proud man, a deacon at our small church, someone who valued reputation above almost everything else, and I had shattered that reputation with my teenage mistake. The boy who had gotten me pregnant was the son of another deacon, a star athlete who denied everything when confronted. His parents believed him, of course. Their golden boy couldn't have been responsible for ruining the preacher's daughter. I was painted as the seductress, the girl who had led their innocent son astray. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been a virgin until that night, frightened and confused and desperate for someone to love me. My mother had pressed a small envelope into my hands as I packed my few belongings into a worn suitcase. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling as she held my hand one last time. "Your father. He loves you," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But he can he won't." She had slipped me $200, money she had saved from her grocery allowance, and a small bag of homemade cookies for the journey. "I'll write to you," she promised, "as soon as I can." But the letters never came. I never saw either of them again. My mother died 4 years later, alone in a hospital bed while I was working a double shift at the diner, unable to afford the bus ticket home. My father followed 2 years after that, his heart giving out during a Sunday service. I learned about their deaths through a brief letter from their lawyer, businesslike and impersonal. The next 18 years were a blur of sacrifice that I had somehow convinced myself was worth it. I cleaned houses during the day, worked at a diner at night, took in laundry on weekends. I remember the smell of bleach permanently embedded in my hands, the ache in my lower back from bending over bathtubs and scrubbing floors. I remember the feeling of other people's dirt under my fingernails. The way wealthy women would watch me clean their homes as if I were invisible, speaking about their lives and problems as if I weren't there. Mrs. Henderson, one of my regular clients, had a daughter about Sarah's age. I would watch her daughter come home from school, throw her expensive backpack on the floor, and demand snacks from their full refrigerator. The girl had tutors, piano lessons, a car for her 16th birthday. I would clean her room, picking up clothes that cost more than I made in a week. And think about Sarah at home, doing her homework at our kitchen table while I worked my second job. I skipped meals so Sarah could have new school supplies. I wore the same winter coat for 5 years so she could have dance lessons. I remember the night I stood in the grocery store, calculator in hand, choosing between fresh fruit for Sarah's lunch and the medicine I needed for a persistent cough. I bought the fruit and suffered through the cough for 2 more weeks until I could afford the medicine. The apartment we lived in was small, cramped, but I had tried to make it beautiful. I hung curtains I had sewn from fabric remnants, painted the walls with colors I found on clearance, filled every corner with plants I had grown from cuttings. Sarah's room was larger than mine, filled with books and toys I had found at garage sales and carefully cleaned and repaired. I remember the night she came home from a friend's house, crying because she had seen how the other girl lived. "Why can't we have nice things?" she had asked, and I had felt something break inside me. I had pulled her close, inhaling the scent of her hair, and promised her that someday things would be different, that someday she would have everything she deserved. When she was small, Sarah would curl up next to me on our second-hand couch, her head on my shoulder while I folded other people's laundry. "Mama," she would say, "when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a castle." I would laugh and kiss the top of her head, inhaling the sweet scent of her No More Tears shampoo. Where was that little girl now? I thought about all the times I had been introduced not as Sarah's mother, but as the woman who raised her. I thought about family photos where I stood slightly apart, never quite belonging to the life I had built for her. I thought about graduations and celebrations where I was thanked perfunctorily, like staff being acknowledged at the end of a successful event. Sarah's high school graduation came flooding back to me now. I had saved for months to buy her a special dress, something she could wear to the senior dinner dance. I remember standing in the department store, holding 2 dresses, one for her, one for me. I put mine back and bought her 2 instead, telling myself I could wear the same black dress I had worn to every important event for the past 5 years. At the graduation ceremony, I watched her walk across the stage, her shoulders straight, her smile radiant. She was valedictorian, heading to college on a partial scholarship I had helped her secure by working with her on applications every night after my shifts. The guidance counselor had been amazed by her essay about overcoming adversity, about being raised by a single mother who had sacrificed everything for her education. When she gave her speech, she thanked her teachers, her friends, her boyfriend. She mentioned me only in passing, as someone who had supported her education. I sat in the auditorium, wearing my worn black dress, and felt the familiar ache of being acknowledged but not truly seen. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that her success was my success, that her happiness was worth more than recognition. But sitting in that auditorium, surrounded by other proud parents who were hugging and crying and celebrating, I felt profoundly alone. The other mothers all seemed to know each other, connected through PTA meetings and school events I had never been able to attend because I was working. They wore clothes I recognized from the boutiques where I cleaned, drove cars I had washed in wealthy driveways, carried purses that cost more than my monthly rent. College was 4 years of phone calls that always began with "Mom, I need money for books, money for clothes, money for spring break trips with friends whose parents could afford such luxuries." I took on extra cleaning jobs, worked holidays, sold the few pieces of jewelry I owned. I remember working Christmas Day one year, cleaning a house for a family that was skiing in Colorado, so I could send Sarah money for her textbooks. I told myself this was temporary, that once she graduated and found a good job, things would be different. But even after she graduated, even after she found work at a prestigious marketing firm, the requests continued. Money for a security deposit on a better apartment, money for a car repair, money for a bridesmaid dress for her best friend's wedding. She never asked about my life, my dreams, my struggles. Our conversations were transactions, not relationships. I was the bank of Mom, always open, always available, never expected to need anything in return. But it was the envelope my mother had given me that held the key to everything. I had kept it all these years, tucked away in my jewelry box, never quite understanding why she had insisted I take it. It wasn't until Sarah turned 18 that I finally opened it, finding a letter in my father's handwriting and a legal document I didn't fully understand at the time. The letter was written on his church letterhead, in the careful script he had always used for important documents. His handwriting was shaky, aged, but the words were clear and powerful. "My dearest daughter," the letter began, "by the time you read this, I will be gone, and I pray you will forgive an old man's pride. I failed you when you needed me most, and I have lived with that shame every day since. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped believing in your strengths. I have watched you from afar, through friends and neighbors who have kept me informed of your life. I know about the jobs you work, the sacrifices you make, the woman you have become. I know about my granddaughter, about the beautiful child you are raising with such grace and determination. I am proud of you both, more than I ever had the courage to say. I was wrong to cast you out. I was wrong to choose my reputation over my daughter's need for love and support. I was wrong to let my pride blind me to your courage, your strength, your incredible capacity for love. You were 17 years old and scared, and instead of protecting you, I abandoned you. I will carry that shame to my grave. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see the woman you have become, the mother you are, the quiet dignity with which you have built a life from nothing. You are everything I raised you to be, and more. You are strong, loving, selfless, and beautiful. You are my daughter, and I am proud to be your father. Enclosed is a codicil to my will, prepared in secret and known only to my attorney. Should you ever be publicly humiliated or disrespected by your descendants, treated as less than the remarkable woman you are, this inheritance will be immediately redirected. The money I left to them will go instead to you, or to whomever you choose to honor with it. I couldn't protect you then, but perhaps I can protect you now. You were never the disgrace, my darling. You were always the light. I had consulted with his lawyer years later, learning that my father had left a substantial inheritance money that had been sitting in trust, waiting. The codicil was legally binding and ironclad. All it required was proof of public humiliation by his descendants. Standing in that bathroom mirror, I realized I finally had that proof. If you're still here, please like this video and subscribe. That's how more people will hear stories like mine. The weeks following the wedding were a masterclass in manipulation that I was finally clear-eyed enough to see. Sarah called 3 days after returning from her honeymoon, not to thank me for the beautiful ceremony, but to ask if I could help with the honeymoon expenses. They had gone over budget, she explained, and the credit card bills were overwhelming. It would mean so much to us, Mom, she said, her voice taking on that wheedling tone I remembered from her childhood. This is our once-in-a-lifetime trip, and you know how hard Michael works. He deserves this. Michael, her new husband, was a perfectly pleasant man who had grown up with every advantage I had never been able to provide. His parents had paid for his education, his car, the down payment on their first apartment. He had never worked a service job, never worried about rent, never chosen between groceries and electricity. He was kind enough to me, but in the way people are kind to service workers, polite, distant, slightly condescending. At the wedding reception, I had overheard him talking to his college friends about his new mother-in-law situation. He had described me as sweet but simple, someone who tries hard but doesn't really understand how the world works. He had laughed about my job cleaning houses, making jokes about how I probably knew more about other people's dirt than my own daughter's life. When I gently declined to fund their honeymoon, explaining that I had already stretched my budget to its limit for the wedding, Sarah's tone changed instantly. "I can't believe you're being so selfish," she said, her voice sharp with disappointment. "After everything we've been through, after everything I've achieved, you can't help us start our marriage properly." Everything she had achieved, as if I had been merely a bystander in her success, rather than the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to make those achievements possible. "I worked 3 jobs to pay for your college," I said quietly. "I sold my mother's wedding ring to buy your graduation dress. I've given you everything I had, and now you're keeping score," she snapped. "I never asked you to do those things. You chose to have me. You chose to raise me alone. Don't make me feel guilty for the choices you made." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had chosen to have her, yes, but I had also chosen to love her, to sacrifice for her, to build my entire life around her happiness. And now she was telling me that none of it mattered, that it had all been my choice and therefore my burden alone. Then came the suggestions that I should sell my small house, the one I had finally managed to buy when Sarah was in college, and move into a smaller apartment. The house was modest, a 2-bedroom bungalow in a working-class neighborhood, but it was mine. I had painted every room myself, planted the garden with my own hands, fixed the leaky faucet and the squeaky floorboards through trial and error and YouTube tutorials. "It's just practical, Mom," she said during one of our increasingly tense phone conversations. "You don't need all that space, and the money could be useful for, well, for family things. Family things." As if I hadn't been contributing to family things my entire adult life. Her new husband began making comments about my simple lifestyle, suggesting I might be more comfortable in a senior community. They spoke about me in third person even when I was sitting right there, discussing my finances and future as if I were a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be respected. "Eleanor's house is really too much for her to maintain," Michael would say to Sarah, while I sat at their dinner table eating the meal I had cooked and brought. "Those old places need constant repair work. She'd be much better off in one of those nice senior apartments." I had brought dinner because Sarah had mentioned she was too tired to cook after work, and I wanted to help. I had stopped at the grocery store after cleaning Mrs. Patterson's house, bought ingredients for Sarah's favorite meal, and spent 2 hours cooking in their kitchen while they watched television. When we sat down to eat, neither of them thanked me for the meal or asked about my day. I began to understand that I had never been Sarah's mother in her mind. I had been her provider, her safety net, her solution to problems, but I had never been her equal, never been someone worthy of genuine respect or consideration. The revelation should have destroyed me, but instead, it liberated me. I started small. I stopped answering every phone call immediately. I began making plans without consulting Sarah first. I enrolled in a pottery class I had wanted to take for years, something I had always dismissed as too frivolous, too expensive, too selfish. The clay felt wonderful between my fingers, earthy and full of possibility. The pottery studio was in an old warehouse converted to artist spaces, filled with natural light and the quiet sounds of creativity. My instructor, Maria, was a woman about my age who had started pottery after her divorce, turning her pain into something beautiful and useful. The other students were a mix of ages and backgrounds, but we all shared something: the desire to create, to express ourselves through our hands. "Don't think so much," Maria would say, watching me work. "Let the clay tell you what it wants to be." I discovered I had a talent for it. My pieces were simple but elegant, functional but beautiful. Maria encouraged me to experiment with glazes, to try different techniques, to trust my instincts. For the first time in decades, I was doing something purely for myself, something that brought me joy without any expectation of sacrifice or service. The first piece I completed was a small bowl, glazed in deep blue with flecks of gold. It was imperfect, slightly lopsided, but it was mine. I had made it with my own hands, shaped it according to my own vision. When I held it up to the light, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in my own accomplishment. Sarah's calls became more frequent, more demanding. There was talk of a second wedding, a real reception for the extended family, who hadn't been able to attend the first. There were hints about a down payment for a house, about starting a family, about all the ways I could continue to be useful. "Mom, you know how expensive it is to start a family these days," she said during one particularly manipulative phone call. "And Michael's parents have already done so much for us. It would be embarrassing if my side of the family couldn't contribute equally." My side of the family. As if I weren't a family of one, as if my contributions hadn't already exceeded anything Michael's parents had provided. Michael's parents were lovely people who had welcomed Sarah warmly into their family. They had paid for the rehearsal dinner, contributed to the honeymoon fund, and given the couple a generous cash gift, but they had also made it clear that they expected my side to contribute equally, despite the obvious disparity in our financial situations. "It's not about the money," Michael's mother had said to me at the wedding reception, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "It's about showing that both families are invested in the marriage." But it was about the money, of course. It was always about the money. But I was done being useful. I was ready to be whole. I began to notice things I had ignored for years: the way Sarah introduced me to her friends as my mom with no pride in her voice, no warmth in her eyes. The way she asked about my health only as a preface to asking for money. The way she had never, in all her adult years, asked about my dreams, my hopes, my desires for my own life. I remembered the last time I had visited her apartment, before the wedding. She had been showing me her wedding registry, pointing out the expensive items she hoped to receive. I had mentioned, casually, that I was thinking of taking a pottery class. "That's nice, Mom," she had said, not looking up from her laptop. "But don't you think you should be saving money right now? The wedding is going to be expensive." Even my smallest desire for self-improvement was seen as a threat to her financial security. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and old books, exactly as I remembered from years before. Mr. Morrison, now in his 70s, smiled warmly as I entered. We had kept in touch sporadically over the years, but he knew why I was here. "Are you certain about this, Eleanor?" he asked gently. The legal document spread across his mahogany desk. "This is a significant decision. Once the codicil is enacted, it cannot be reversed." I thought about Sarah's wedding, about the dismissive laughter, about years of being treated like hired help rather than the woman who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's success. I thought about my father's letter, about the love and protection he had tried to offer across the years. "I'm certain," I said. Mr. Morrison nodded slowly. "Your father was a complicated man," he said, "but he loved you deeply. He regretted his actions every day after you left. He asked me to prepare this codicil because he knew that children, who are given everything, sometimes forget to value the one who gave it." He pulled out a thick file, yellowed with age. "He came to see me every year on your birthday," he said. "He would ask about you, about Sarah, about how you were doing. He had friends who kept him informed, people from the church who had stayed in touch with you over the years. He was proud of you, Eleanor, proud of the woman you had become, the mother you were." The inheritance was substantial, more than I had ever imagined. My father had been quietly successful, investing wisely and living modestly. He had owned several properties, had made shrewd investments in the stock market, had lived carefully and saved diligently. The money had grown over the decades, accumulating interest and dividends, but more than the financial freedom, it was the recognition that mattered. Someone had seen my worth, had anticipated my pain, had loved me enough to protect me even from the grave. I decided to establish a scholarship fund for young single mothers trying to finish their education. I used my father's name for the foundation, wanting to honor the man who had failed me once but had spent years trying to make amends. The first recipient was a 19-year-old girl named Maria. Yes, the same name as my pottery teacher, who reminded me of myself at that age, scared, determined, and completely alone. I met with Maria at a coffee shop near the community college, where she was studying nursing. She was thin, tired-looking, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from working multiple jobs while trying to study. Her baby, a 6-month-old boy named David, slept in a car seat beside our table. "I don't understand why you're helping me," she said, tears in her eyes, as I explained the scholarship. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," I said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "I know you're working harder than anyone should have to. I know you're sacrificing sleep and meals and dreams to give your son a better life. I know you're stronger than you realize." She began to cry then, and I handed her tissues from my purse, the same way I had comforted Sarah when she was small, the same way my mother had comforted me during my own tears. Sarah learned about the inheritance through the lawyer's office, as I had requested. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was working on a vase in my pottery class. I let it go to voicemail, my hands covered in clay, my heart surprisingly calm. "Mom, we need to talk." Her voice was tight with panic. "There's been some mistake with Grandpa's will. The lawyer says ... He says you inherited everything, but that's impossible. He barely spoke to you." I finished my vase before I called her back. It was a simple piece, but beautiful, a deep blue glaze that reminded me of the ocean I had always wanted to visit. When I did call her back, my voice was steady, quiet, but unmistakably final. "It's not a mistake, Sarah." And he spoke to me in the only way that mattered, through love and protection. "Something I thought I had taught you about." The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken truths. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I know you don't. And that's the saddest part of all." I hung up the phone and returned to my clay, my hands steady, my heart finally at peace. The months that followed were the most peaceful of my adult life. I traveled to places I had only dreamed of: Italy, where I took a cooking class and learned to make pasta from scratch; Ireland, where I traced my family's roots and stood in the cemetery where my great-grandmother was buried; the ocean, finally, where I watched the sunrise over the Atlantic and felt the salt spray on my face. I took cooking classes, learning to make dishes I had never had time to attempt when I was working multiple jobs. I volunteered at the local women's shelter, where I met other women with stories like mine, women who had given everything and been repaid with indifference or abuse. I discovered that I had a talent for mentoring, for seeing potential in people who had been dismissed or overlooked. Sarah and I maintained a careful distance. She would call occasionally, always with an underlying current of resentment and confusion. She couldn't understand how the woman she had dismissed as just the maid could have inherited a fortune, could have chosen to give it away to strangers instead of family. But I was no longer interested in explaining myself to someone who had never bothered to truly see me. On my 53rd birthday, I received a card from the first scholarship recipient. She had finished her nursing degree and was working at a children's hospital. Inside, she had written, "Thank you for believing in women like us. Your father would be proud." I cried then, for the first time in months. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly known, truly valued, truly seen. Now, tell me in the comments, have you ever been quietly underestimated and found your strength in silence? I keep my father's letter in a frame now, next to a photo of myself at the pottery wheel. In the picture, I'm laughing, my hair pulled back, my hands covered in clay. I look like someone who has found her purpose, someone who has learned that love isn't about sacrifice, it's about recognition, respect, and the courage to demand both. The scholarship fund has helped 12 young mothers so far. I get updates from each of them, photos of their graduations, their children, their new lives. They call me their guardian angel, but I know the truth. They saved me as much as I saved them. They reminded me that love, real love, is about seeing potential and nurturing it, about believing in someone's worth even when they can't see it themselves. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah will ever understand what she lost. Not the money, though, that was substantial, but the relationship she could have had with a mother who would have moved mountains for her, who did move mountains for her, who only wanted to be seen and valued in return. But I've learned that you can't force someone to see your worth. You can only see it yourself, protect it fiercely, and share it with those who recognize its value. I am building a new life now, one pottery piece at a time, one helped woman at a time, one moment of joy at a time. I am no longer defined by what I gave up, but by what I chose to keep: my dignity, my strength, my capacity for love. Sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't confrontation. It's the quiet dignity of walking away and building something beautiful from the ashes of what you thought you deserved. My father understood that. He knew that real love isn't about giving everything away. It's about recognizing your own worth and protecting it, even when the people closest to you cannot see it. I am no longer just the maid who paid for everything. I am a woman who learned to pay herself first, in respect, in love, in the recognition that she was always worthy of more than she allowed herself to accept, and that, perhaps, is the most valuable inheritance of all.